Hey, and welcome to the introductory video manual for the OSC tools from eraserMice and Isotonik Studios. I'm just going to go through, take some time to go through each of the devices that you're going to get with the first version here of the OSC tools. So the first thing you're probably going to look at is the OSC monitor. That's one of the most useful things. This is going to help you really kind of understand what's going on. And basically, it's a way for monitoring messages that come into live. And you're going to see by default, it comes in on port 8000. And you'll see the OSC address or the OSC name. And you can see the parameters that come in. So there's nothing going in right now. Okay. Now, one of the things about this video, it's going to be maybe a little bit odd in that what we're going to be doing everything inside of live. So you're going to see a demonstration of the senders and the receivers. Normally, you probably wouldn't use the OSC tools in this way. You'd have some kind of external application, your Touch OSC or VDMX or Yanix or QLab or some other kind of application that you're really going to be talking back and forth with. But we're going to stick to just doing this stuff inside live so we can look at all the devices and in a controlled environment. Okay, so we've got the monitor. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a sender, and let's see, we will look at the normal OSC sender and drag that over here. The OSC sender is an audio device, so most of the OSC devices are audio devices, so you can put them on any track. Okay, so by default, you're going to see these six senders on here. It's actually a combination of 6 senders in one, each with their own OSC name or address, and they each go out. You can set a IP address and an IP port for each of them, and this is the value that's being sent. For these, you're seeing values between 0 and 1. That's the most useful, typically useful address, or excuse me, the range of numbers. Now you see when I started turning this, immediately we saw that okay, there are messages coming in. EM parameter 1, and here's the value on port 8000, okay? And that same goes for all of them. Use the next one, parameter 2 comes in. There's parameter 4, here's parameter 5, and so on. They have a single value. Again, it's between 0 and 1. Now, if I change this, if I set this port, I'm going to click on it, just say 8100, right? Now, you're not going to see anything change over there. Why is that? Because I'm sending on port 8000 and receiving on port 8100. If I change one of these to 8100, okay, now you'll be able to see that one come in at 8100. But the rest they aren't received because the ports are wrong, okay? So senders need to know about a destination IP address and a port. A receiver, like basically the monitor is a receiver, all it needs to know about is the port, because receivers are listeners. You listen to them on the address that they're on the machine that they're on, so you don't need to specify an address. Now, by default, I populate these things with address 127.0.0.1, and what that is a special IP address that's basically the loopback address. It means no matter what machine you're on, just use that as the home address. So if you send to that, you're sending to yourself. Okay, so it's an easy way to figure out what's going on. If you were talking to an external machine, another machine, or your iPod, your iPad, your Android device, whatever it is, you're going to set it to the IP address of that machine. Okay, I'm not going to cover all the IP basics in here. I'm going to leave that for you to do a little bit of research on your own. Okay, so let's set this back to 8000. Whoops, 8000 there, and we set this back to 8000. Okay, so it's pretty basic. You know, you just send a value out and it gets received by something else. So what are you going to do with this thing? All right, now I'm on the second audio track here. I'm going to open up the clip that's on there. I'm going to go to envelope. And you'll see an envelope, I can choose OSC sender, and I have those 6 variables right there. And what I can do is I can then put envelopes on them and send OSC values. I could even do this with automation on, like in recording automation, that sort of thing. Now when we come back over here and I play the clip, I'm going to turn the volume down a little bit. You see I'm sending OSC values according to that device. Okay? That's really great for, like, say you have VDMX and you wanted to change your crossfader, or you want to change a certain video effect or whatever, along with your clips, you can embed all the OSC information directly in the clip, and it's just going to play it out. So no matter what clip you choose, the envelopes from that are going to get sent out through the OSC messages, just like that. So that's the basic OSC sender. There's another flavor of that called the OSC Sender 6-pack. Now that one was a 6-pack as well, but this is sort of more arranged in the 6-pack as if you, bought a 6-pack. So this is just a convenient way. If you like looking at this way versus the other one, you can do that. Now you'll notice in here all these, they do have, not all of the devices, but specifically the senders, have this little speed limit guy on here set to 50, and that's 50 milliseconds. That limits how often you send messages out. You can turn that up or down to whatever you want. Some applications, you can set it pretty low. Other ones you set it higher. It's basically to avoid overflowing the receiver application. The only one I've seen where it really mattered much was actually Quartz Composer. The other ones are pretty good at sending, dealing with high-speed OSC messages. It was kind of surprising that Quartz Composer had an issue with that. But that's why those are there. So you can set that down. By default it's 50, and that means basically you have an update rate of, about 20 hertz or something like that. Yeah, 20 times 50 is 1,000, right? Something like that. Which is pretty good, but you can certainly turn that up and down from there. Maybe you want to set something like 10. That's 100 hertz, which is obviously a lot better. Okay. So the OSC Sender 6-pack works exactly the same as the other one. You'll see there I'm changing parameters and the values are changing, and I map it the same way. So that's not all that different. Let's look at some of the other senders. Getting a little fancier, you will see the OSC 1IP sender. Now this is special in that it assumes that all of these 6 OSC parameters are going to a single IP address. So you have a single IP and port for them. And so this is like, again, unless you have multiple computers, maybe you just go ahead and use this one. Works pretty much the same way. Now, it gets more interesting with this scale and offset. Okay, so right now it's scaling 1, which means go from 0 to 1. But if I set this to something like 2, what's going to happen is my range is going to get scaled from between 0 and 2. Okay, so this is useful if you've got like some kind of other application that wants to see, a broader range of things. And you can also use the offset, like say I set the offset to -1, watch what happens. Now I go between -1 and 1, okay? So you can get, really pretty fancy with this. So you set this to like, I want to say 4 and a range of 8, right? So now I'm going to go between -4 and +4. Pretty useful. This is going to depend on your application. You're going to need to kind of get into that or not. A lot of the time you're going to be just set to 1 and your offset set to 0. Okay, so that's another type of sender. Now one more sender is this OSC 1IP 3-param sender. Okay, now OSC messages, you don't necessarily just have one single parameter or one value that gets sent. You can send multiple parameters in the same OSC message, and that's what the OSC 1IP sender 3-params is about. So you'll see down here in my monitor, you can see as I change within the same OSC address space, the OSC name over here, each message has all 3 of these being updated. And that's useful. Like, say you have something that wants to receive a R, a G, and a B value, for instance. You can put that in there. You can also say, I only want to send 1, or I can send 2, or I can send 3, all of them. So in that case, this is a way you can just turn all these down to 1, and then it's going to work an awful lot like the OSC 1IP sender. Okay. Now a lot of these, the reason there is some redundancy in here is that you can open these up, you can edit them, you can customize them, and this is really kind of to show you some of the ways that you can work with the live interface, the live APIs, and all that, and some of the other ones. You'll see that as we get into that. So which one you use, a lot will be sort of your preference and also the capabilities of the programs that you're working with. Okay, so those are the basic senders. So let's see, we've covered 4 so far. 1IP sender, 1IP sender, 3-params. We've said the normal sender and the 6-pack. All right, what other kind of senders do we have? From here we get a lot fancier. All right, we have a track levels sender that directly works with the with the live API and monitors the level values on the track, the input and output levels according to live, and will send those out automatically. You see, I dropped on here. The track is, let's see. The prefix is M4L, and that's just by default. I could, get crazy with that. Say I wanted to say EM on there. Okay, so now it's M4L EM tracks 1. That's the prefix now, and you'll see as I change the volume, nothing happens. But let's see, as the track plays, you'll see the output level on here is changing, and that's a scale value from 0 to 1. Okay, if I had an audio device that had input on it, then let's see if I do this. Oh, who knows? Maybe I'm going to create some feedback here. So I will say in. All right, now you see everything, and that's my microphone. There's my input levels and my output levels since it's turned down. So you can see input levels, output levels. Useful stuff. Okay, if you wanted to have OSC controlling something that way, could be pretty interesting. So if you want, stuff that's responding to your audio levels, your kick drum or something, you can put one per track, and each one gets its own individual address there. Tracks 1, tracks 2, tracks 3, and so on. So that's your tracks level sender. All right. Now there's the track info sender. Okay. What does this do? All right. Now you notice you have, of course, your address and your port that you're going to send it to, and a prefix. But there's a whole bunch of information down here. Now this is sending the basic track mixer information from this particular track out to OSC. It uses, you can see what the addresses are going to be down here. You'll see I have volume. Okay, so as I send volume changes on this track, they get sent out in this case. M4L tracks 1 volume. Okay, whoops, yep. And if I was on track 0, let's see, yeah, it's going to change depending on what tracks it's on. So say I drop this over to this track here. Okay, tracks 2, it's 0 based, so the first one's going to be 0, I think, I hope, or I've goofed. Okay, tracks 0, so that's important to know. All right, back to here. You'll see also panning is sent. I have the enable track activator on off. You've got track solo. Okay. You also have mute, and that's going to come into play as you get into some of the various, as things are like switched modes around. And so, like for instance, if you solo this track, the other tracks are going to get muted. Right? Watch this. Think. So now this track is muted, even though, right? Okay, this track is soloed. Or what am I doing here? This track is now muted because it's not active. Okay, so you have this kind of combination of things. So you can respond to all these sorts of things on your OSC receiver, and to do, like, say you wanted to turn off a certain clip or turn off a certain effect or whatever that is, based on what is going on in live at the time. Okay, so take that one out. Now, what other kind of senders do we have? This is an important sender. Okay, this is a combination sender receiver. This sends the transport information. So for instance, you'll see if I choose, I want to send out all my transport information at some interval. I'm going to say, oh, send it out at roughly 23 milliseconds, intervals. So you see the moment I hit play, okay, the transport gets sent. You see it's all over here. You also happen to see that the tempo is getting sent, so it knows 87 BPM. And there was also, let's see, if I turn off that, you will see I get a stop and a playing state set to 0. As I start, playing state, I get a start command, and playing state is set to 1. Okay, why both of those things? Well, some applications that you're going to get, it wants to know a playing state, it wants to have an actual parameter, and others can just respond to an address like that. So I include both. All right, now this other device, well, you can have it send it out at certain intervals, right? You can send it out at an 8th note, half note, 64th note, or according to a time interval. All right, now here's the receiver part of things. So what this is going to do is going to say, all right, I want to start or stop the transport depending on a message I've received. So in order to demonstrate this, since that's a receiver, this is the first time we're seeing a receiver other than the monitor, I'm going to quickly show you. Let's see, I'm going to pull up a sender again here, OSC Sender, and this is a receiver down here. And now I'm going to use this map feature. I'm going to hit map, and now the first OSC message it receives on that port is going to get mapped here. Ready? Okay. Now what happens is, you'll notice nothing happened right now. I'm going to tell it, okay, it's now listening, and as soon as it sees 1, it turns the transport on. Okay, so message of 1 means start the transport. You see that it's playing, and now it's stopped. Okay, any value other than 1, it's got to be 1 to play. Anything other than 1 is stopped. Okay, very, very useful. Okay, so now we had that receiver. Now, let's see. Another useful device that is a sender and a receiver is this OSC Ricochet device. Now, what this does is kind of, again, it depends on the application you're using. This is a combination receiver and sender. And the idea behind this is that, say you have a device that's a more controller and you want it to send a value, you send a value to live, but then you also want that value to come back so that you can update something in that thing, like, touch OSC. You want to see the fact that the buttons are pressed or something, change. So it sends back basically an acknowledgement, an indicator of what the value is set at. That's why it has an incoming port and an outgoing address and port. That's what's going on there. Now we're getting into, okay, this is controlling something. Now you've probably seen the Max for Live API devices if you've been to a lot of Max for Live things. So the idea here is, all right, you map this to a certain parameter. It could be on any track, it could be anything. So we'll say map and say it's the master volume, okay? So now I'm also gonna map and I'm gonna send this to that. So you'll see as parameter 2 comes in, that was the one that was received and mapped. As it goes up and down, okay, it is controlling the master volume over here. Now you'll also see if we come over to our monitor, and I'm going to change the monitor's port to port 9000. I'm going to close this sender. Well, nope, I'm going to need that. All right, as this goes up and down, my value changes, my volume changes, and back over here on port 9000, the message comes back out. So I know that that's exactly what I'm receiving, okay? So it's a little complicated, but that's the Ricochet idea. Basically, it sends a message, the message comes back, but it also controls something in the meantime, all right? Now there's a whole bunch of receivers kind of like that, and each one, has some finesse, depending on, if you have multiple addresses and multiple parameters, all that sort of stuff. So for starters, let's look at the Receiver Advanced, and this is based on the Advanced API plugins, or excuse me, not plugins, the Advanced API stuff that you get normally with the Max for Live kind of building blocks. It adds the basic, it receives on a certain port, and you can map that to any device, just like we saw. This one doesn't ricochet though, right? So I'm gonna come over here. Let's say, all right, map. I change the parameter over here. That changes, and say I want to map that to this volume up here, for instance. Okay, real easy to do. Okay, so this is going to be, kind of a workhorse. If you want to just control one parameter real quick and easy, this is the device to do. All right, but in a lot of cases, you want to have, more sophisticated, or you want to work with a bunch of things at once. So you're going to use some of the multi devices. So let's look first at the multi-address receiver. And the way this works is very similar to the advanced receiver that we just saw, except that there are multiple addresses on that port that you can listen to. You get to each one by clicking, down here, and mapping works very similarly. So like say over here, I say map, and I'm going to scroll over, and the first one gets mapped there, and it's going to keep mapping as I add things in, right? And it's going to keep mapping. The moment it maps all 9, it's going to pop out of map mode, but I can also take it back out again. If you do go back into map mode, you'll notice it reinitializes and you have to do it again. That's just sort of the way it is. It's not the most burdensome thing in the world, so for now it's going to stay that way. And then mapping, you just have to make sure, okay, choose the live tab thing over here that you're interested in mapping. So say EM parameter 1, that's going to get mapped to, say, this volume over here. Okay, so now when I come over here and I change EM parameter 1, that's changing my volume over there, so that's mapped all nicely. Okay, so that's the basic multi-address receiver, or the multi-address receiver. And you'll also see there's the Multiparam Receiver. Now, sounds sort of familiar, looks familiar, but it's actually quite different in that this receives on a single address or a single OSC name, but it is assuming that it's going to receive multiple parameters. This is good if you're, let's say, receiving an XY message, or some kind of more complex thing that might have an RG and a B on it, an alpha. It might have some type of specialized transport feature, or something like that. That you want to take advantage of. So we'll use the 3-param sender to kind of demonstrate that. All right, so I'll say map, and I will turn a parameter here. Now you'll notice that all three parameters are automatically received. EMA param 1, you know, all those three things are there, right? So say one was an X and a Y, you'd get them and you map them the same way. So, you know, it's easy enough to go through and say, okay, the first parameter, map that to, you know, that send. And the second parameter, whoops, the second parameter is going to get set to that send. And say the third parameter might get set to pan. Okay, so now as things change, within one OSC message, you're controlling three live parameters. Okay, so we've covered, let's see, the 3-param sender and the multi-param receiver and the normal multi-address receiver. One IP sender, 3 params, the receiver advanced. We talked about the ricochet, sender. Okay, now there are some special MIDI devices. Oh, wait, before I get to the MIDI devices, let's take a look at this envelope because we were on senders. Basically, what this is all about is it is an envelope follower that sends out an OSC message. Okay. So it's sort of similar. It has, you know, like there's the track level sender, but this is a real envelope follower, and it's got some envelope follower style. It's based on, you know, some of the built-in stuff. So you can have gain on it, you have rise and fall delay, and you can set a min and max for it. So again, a little bit more exciting. So imagine this. This is going to be set to, well, I'll change this up. I'll say this is port 9000 now. And you'll see as I play on this track. Okay. And let's change up this parameter. Let's say env. Okay, so this one's really great, especially if you know, say you have like text scrolling or you have a crossfader or something that you want to also, you know, have it triggering on the effect or something like that, and you want to like really kind of customize the response time, or maybe you're controlling some kind of volume or something and you need to limit the range or something, right? You'll see it's going to come, you know, much smaller values. Limit the bottom end, that kind of thing. Top end, smooth it out. All that kind of fun stuff like you'd have in an envelope follower. You do, because it's an envelope follower. It also has that speed limiter on there, so just in case your receiver application can't quite keep up, you can turn down the up or down the speed limit on there. All right, so all those now. All right, now we're going to get into some of the clip functionality. And clips obviously are really important. It's, you know, meat and potatoes for Ableton Live, so we have to be able to support those. So let's see. I'm going to have a clip trigger receiver. All right, and what this is going to do is trigger clips on this track according to incoming messages. Now, this one is a little bit tricky to demonstrate. I have to use the one IP sender on this one, right? Because normally what wants to happen is I want to see a range. You see, as a parameter is where the clip names are going to kind of come in. So let's just do this real quick. All right. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 copies of my clip. That means I'm going to need a range of 5 values. So I'm going to set scale here to 5. I'm going to make this up on the fly as I go here. And that's port 8000, and incoming is that. So let's try this and see what happens. Okay. So I've triggered the first clip, and I triggered the second one. This is continuously going on, so this is probably not the greatest thing. Well, let's do this. I can speed limit it a little bit. I'll speed limit it to a second. Let's see if that'll work. Whoops, I meant to say that. Okay, so now I'm not triggering it all the time. This is really probably not the way I would use this, but you get the idea. It's important that basically, and then let's see, I'll set this guy over here back to 8000 so you can see what's going on. Basically, you know, as things go on, it's going to trigger, like in this case, clip 2. If I go all the way down to 0, clip 0 is going to get triggered. Okay, and again, this is way more useful as something that's just going to say, okay, here's the clip index and trigger that, as opposed to you know, trying to do it with a continuous controller. But you know, you can do it that way if you wanted. All right, let's see. Now there's this other part in here, offset, but basically what that says is, say it was set at 2, I'm going to start triggering at 2 and work my way up there. It's a way to kind of skip the first couple of devices, that sort of thing. Oh, you know, in order to do that, I have to do this. I have to say -2. Sorry. Okay, so now it's moved up to ones that don't exist. Okay. And it's going to be these. So, okay, so the offset should be -2, so it like moves everything down. You have to think it moves these down by 2 there. Sorry for that. Okay. Now, normally the clip is being sent in the, it's assumed it's going to be received as a parameter right here. Now, there are applications that would rather see it right here in the name. Like, see here, here's 1. So watch this. Now what I'm going to do is I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And let's see if this works. All right, I'm going to set this back to 1. And I'm going to set this back to 0. So when I send this one, I'm going to set speed limit back to 20, say. Living life on the edge here, trying to... Okay, there's that one. Now I just did 3. And there's 4, right? Okay, now say I did the... I'm going to set that back to -1 again. So the first one... Oops. Now here I'm doing the opposite way. Okay, here's 1. Okay. That triggers the first one. This should trigger the second one. There we go. Here's the third one. Oh, it triggers on 1, by the way. I should have made that clear. There's nothing on that last one. So I don't trigger until I go to 1. I can get fancy. All right, what didn't I touch it? Okay, clip trigger receiver. So you can put a clip trigger receiver on any track that has clips on it. Now, so you can't trigger scenes with that one because scenes don't have clips associated with them. So with that, we have the scene trigger receiver, and we can put that, it can be on any track, but really scenes are on the master. It works exactly as the clip trigger, except it is triggering, it's for triggering scenes. So for our case here, I'm gonna even put it like right here in place of this one, and the next to this one, and I'll disable that. You'll see if I name it the same and I do all the same stuff, I should. Oh, I gotta map it first. All right. Okay, but now it's triggering the scenes. So anything, all the tracks on here would get triggered at the same time. Okay. So say you didn't want to, just trigger the drum track and that kind of thing. You can do that sort of thing. All right. Now, last but maybe not least, let's see. Covered that. Track level sender, track info sender. Oh no, I got a bunch more stuff. I'm running out of time. All right. There is the scene trigger receiver, and there is the clip name sender. This is kind of yet another important one. This is when you want to send triggering of clips to something else. Now, the other weird thing is there is no clip, there's no scene name sender, which is kind of a limitation that I ran up against in some of the live API stuff. So, but there's a workaround in that you gotta remember any time you trigger a scene, you're gonna be triggering some clips. So what I do is I tend to create a sort of a dummy track, and I put a clip name sender on there, and this way no matter what gets sent or what happens, I can just have it send that name. If I put it on here, all of these, when they're triggered by the scenes getting triggered, they're going to send OSC messages. Okay, so clip name sender, let's turn that on, and you'll see, you should see, hopefully, okay, 8,000 name and address. Whoops, something got out of whack here. Let's make that 7.0.0.1. Hello. Okay. All right. So now we received M4L track 2, clip name. And I'm going to use this to kind of stretch things out. 91 SNPC4. There it is. And it is in the name of there. So you see this whole thing, and it says, okay, just 1, meaning it was triggered. Now, if you'd rather do it this way, now you're sending the name as a parameter. Okay, so I trigger that. You'll see it says clip name, but the name is over in a parameter over here. That's going to, it's all about how your program likes to see that. And you can say, start clip numbering at 1, start clip, and if you do that, start clip numbering at 0. You can choose to actually even, take out all the information from there. So for instance, now, press that, it just says max for live clip name, and the information is here. So it ignores, maybe I put track in. It all depends what you want to have included in your address there. So you have some pretty flexible things you can do. Now, sometimes you're really just not interested in the name at all, and all you want to do is send out an index. And this is, if you're triggering clips in VDMX, for instance, I use this one. And that's just going to send out, and let's see, I'll say, just like that. So you'll see it just sends out max for live index 1. There that is. So that you might use that to, trigger clips in a media bin or something like that. And you're going to see that the clip numbering starts with 1. If I set that to that, now it starts with 0. Okay, next we're going to take a look at the OSC MIDI devices, and these are slightly trickier to set up, so I've set some things up ahead of time for me here. Okay, so first off, I have a MIDI track, and the MIDI track has 2 clips on it. They're really simple clips, they're just a couple of notes up and down. And you'll notice you're not hearing anything from these clips at the moment. And I suppose, I'll put some instruments on there just to hear what they sound like. So put that there. What a terrible choice of things to put on there to demonstrate something. So let me put something else on there. Well, maybe something boring. Funky organ? That's not boring, but... Okay, it's a little extra funky because that particular clip has some pitch bend in it. And that one does too. Alright, let's create something that has no pitch bend in it. Okay, real simple clip. Alright, so if I look at the devices on here, you'll see I have this OSC MIDI sender, and it doesn't generate any MIDI on this track, it just lets things through. And I'm going to say, alright, send notes through, and I'm not going to put any additional information on it. I'm not going to dress it up, so just say none. So /note is going to be the message. And if I come over to my other track over here, you'll see I've got, I'm going to turn off that effect track, and you'll see I've got an OSC monitor on here. And you'll see the notes coming in. They're all coming in with velocity 0, and they just are /note events. They're pretty boring. Okay. Now, over in my MIDI effects rack here, first off, you have to see I have the IDM pluck, which is one of my favorite sounds. And then I have a MIDI effect rack over here that's got 2 chains in it. And this part isn't really important. I'm just going to show these sort of in parallel because there are 2 OSC MIDI receiving devices. One which is the normal OSC MIDI receiver, and the other one is this OSC to note receiver, and that one's kind of special. Let's start off looking at the OSC MIDI receiver. And I'll turn on the effect rack, and I will turn on that device. Okay, I muted that track, so now we're just hearing the MIDI from the IDM pluck track, and that bounce was my cat just jumping off my lap. Anyway, so it is receiving note information from the other OSC track. So if I stop this one from playing, you don't hear anything on IDM pluck. Okay, because the note information is coming across and being played by the IDM pluck track, which is getting it through OSC. Okay, now you'll see if I went to the MIDI receiver and I switched it to name, it's going to expect to see this name in the message before the /note command, so it's not receiving anything. Same thing for this track. Now it's just going to see track ID channel 1, so it's not going to see anything. Switch it back to none, so it means, okay, I don't care if I see the header or not, I just look for note, okay? And I'm going to listen to pitch, bend, aftertouch, all of my controllers. So if I come over here and I start saying, okay, send pitch bend as well, the tracks that have pitch bend on them are going to get the pitch bend sent. Okay. Now let's go back to the other track again for a second here, this IDM pluck track. And instead I'm going to say, all right, use the track number. Okay, so this is the track number I want to see. And let me go over to the funky organ. And the prefix on here, I'm going to say track number. And if I see on IDM pluck, you'll see it's M4L track 1, channel 1 note. Okay, so I have to tell this guy over here, track 1, channel 1. Okay, and the tracks they're ordered by 0 is the first track, and so sorry about that, but it is. Now the interesting thing you'll notice, you can always turn it to none, and none just means ignore the header, just look for the /note at the end. So I can kind of do this. Oh, switch back to 2 again. So let's to 1 again. Okay. So if I switch things around, it's going to want to reinitialize it, regenerates that. So don't switch that unless you want to go through it again. And for name, it gets real fancy. So to get this right, I'd have to do. Let's see if I can do this. It would be 1 dash. Funky organ. Oops. Alright. And if I go over to the other track, say use name. Wow, got it right. A little bit of typing in there. Or say none. I'll still do it. And I'd have to go 1 funky organ again. Okay, but you get the idea. The quotes in there, every so often it does put some quotes in, especially if you've got gaps in the names. That's why it does that. That's why sometimes it's trying to take care of business for you and put quotes in automatically so you don't have to worry about it. But you should be careful of that, especially if you have spaces in your names. All right, now, so that's the basic. You have a MIDI sender, a MIDI receiver, make sure you get the addresses right, everything's cool. Now this other one over here, this MIDI note receiver, this is a little bit wacky. Now this is really, I designed this so that you could send other information like other controllers or, just, random, not random, but different OSC messages and convert them to note values. So like I have triggers that I use in Yanix and in VDMX and kind of the VJ apps that I have. And they don't send MIDI notes, but they do send like faders or sliders or something like that or triggers. So it's a way to convert from that. Now the simplest case is it assumes that the value that I'm going to get is just a note number, okay? And the way that it then figures out, okay, if all I have is a note number, I also need a velocity and I need a note length. So what it'll do is it comes down here and it's going to generate, this is a little nice range slider, and it will generate a velocity somewhere in the range that you've set. And it'll use this over here, this note value, as the duration for notes it receives. Okay, so it's just going to look at the note number. All right, so let's watch what happens. I'm going to unmute that track and do the other one. And so this is not going to hear anymore, but this is what we're going to hear, hopefully. And I'm going to say map. Pretty much sounds right, because the first value that gets sent on a note is, sure enough, is the note. Sometimes you are getting some repeats, though, because it is trying to trigger a note every time it receives a message. It doesn't know about note offs in this mode, okay? Now, if you want it to act like more or less a normal MIDI note, use the next one, note velocity on off. So it looks for two values. The first one it uses the note, the second one it uses the velocity. So in this case it maps just perfectly. Now you notice I have this pitch set up. So now, if I turn both tracks on, that's just so I can differentiate the two. Otherwise they'd sound exactly the same when it's doing this. Okay, now it starts to get a little funkier here when I have note length. Okay, so now what it's assuming is that the first value I get is a note number, and the second value I get is a time in milliseconds to you know, how long the note should last for. Okay, so this is a little fancier. I mean, it's still receiving it right now, and you don't really hear the difference because it's using that 100, which was the velocity. It's using that as the length in milliseconds. So you get a 0 length when it's 0, but you will get that 100 milliseconds there. So it works out. Now in this case, notice everything is 0. And that's because I'm just getting a note and a velocity. It winds up using 0 as the length. So because I only have 2 parameters in this case, I really can't use that. So this would be something, you know, if you have a special case where you want to send 3 values and have it interpret it, you know, maybe you have, you know, some random notes that you're making up things. But so normally you're going to use probably, you know, in the strictest sense, note velocity on off. That works just like a regular MIDI message. So we can use those two at the same time. Maybe I'm going to get my transposition right. Kind of cool. All right. So let me show you kind of a crazy case. Okay. Now imagine this other track over here. It's got it's sending this pitch bend information. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come over to my receiving track and I'm gonna say, okay, don't listen for pitch bend first off, and I'm gonna come to this other one, and the other track is still sending pitch bend. So let's see, I'm gonna try to get it to do something kind of crazy here. There. That was a little too crazy. I've probably just jammed it up. Basically, what just happened is it listened for the pitch bend information and turned that into note numbers. There we go. The 16th number worked out better. So I'm mapping the pitch bend into note numbers. That's where I get this kind of crazy swoop. It's fun. I mean, you can do some interesting things with that. You know, if you have, again, clip numbers or triggers or things like that. But you know, leave that up to you to experiment with. That's the basic idea, and it's a nice way to be able to encapsulate MIDI. You know, kind of package up MIDI information into OSC messages and send it across your network. You know, so keep the kind of the best of both worlds, and to also, you know, kind of listen to some unusual stuff and turn it into MIDI. So I think that covers all the devices. I hope you check them out. Don't be afraid of opening them up and editing them and kind of checking things out. I know, you know, it's hard to imagine everything you can do with OSC. You should check out some of the other tutorials to see, you know, how we use it with Touch OSC. You can have one about VDMX, probably look at Yannick's at some point, and some other applications, Quartz Composer and whatnot. These are all things you can use with OSC. So check those out. And who knows, down the line, you know, if depending, you know, send us feedback if there's something you'd like to see, and, you know, additional bonus packs, add-on packs, and all that kind of stuff for the OSC Toolkit. Let me know. Let us know at Isotonik, and we'll be happy to take that into account in our future plans. Okay, so until next time, this is eraserMice at Isotonik Studios. Take care.